Whenever it says recording in progress, it pops up this thing that says, do you want to accept or whatever? I'm like, I wouldn't be here otherwise. Why are you asking? Anyway, this is this is Kurt Doolittle, Luke Weiningen. I'm here for the Natural Law Institute. We're doing a chapter by chapter walkthrough of Luke's book, which he'll raise up momentarily, the Primal Primer. If you haven't seen the previous ones, please do. It's sort of one chapter depends on the other. And this chapter is called Disrupted Environment, How to Read a Room, chapter 6. Yes?
Yes.
So what are you trying to get across in this chapter?
So I
and relate just so in the previous chapters you're building up to this, right?
Right. Yeah. Every chapter kind of layers on the
Right. And so with it, just for refresh, they were the general introduction, then cordage, then I'll be able to do them off the top of my head by the time we're done.
Sure.
And cordage, then
baseline versus anomaly.
Baseline anomaly, and this chapter is close to that. And then the next one was shelter.
Shelter, correct.
And then this
and then now we're here. Yeah.
Okay. So in baseline anomaly, what were you trying to get people to understand?
The baseline anomaly is kind of like the foundational concept of the practice of situational awareness, right? We're developing the ability to quickly assess an environment to create a baseline of expectations for what conditions should exist in that environment.
Correct.
So that the purpose of that is so that we can recognize when things deviate from those expectations. We can recognize anomalies.
Right? Look for things that are odd.
Right.
Yes.
Look for anything that doesn't fit.
And this chapter takes that subject further. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. This is sort of how we established the concept of the practice of behavior analysis. This is the first step in developing the competency of behavior or of situational awareness. Right. So this is how we start to perform the operation of situational awareness. The first
is this like when I walk in a room and I see what the order of hot chicks are and make sure I don't go for the top one? Is it like that?
That's exactly part of what we're focusing on.
Okay. I want to make sure I was getting the priority, understanding I needed a metaphor to get it right.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So when I was looking at, when I was putting the book together and I was looking at this as part of the sequence of concepts, it started off, I wasn't sure if I was going to do this in a single chapter or two chapters, right? Because there's situational awareness as it applies to our human interactions, where we're doing the behavioral analysis, where we're doing the interaction with other people, where we're doing the threat analysis of the people that we're interacting with or that are in our environment. And then there's the situational awareness as it applies to how we're interacting with that environment itself.
You mean most people don't walk into a room with the instinct immediately? So how can I kill everybody in here? That isn't normal.
Right. Unfortunately, no.
I don't have to think about it. It just happens.
Right. How can I kill everybody in here, or how can I avoid or get away from everybody?
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Where are the exits and how can I kill everybody in here with what's in here?
Right. Well, and, one of the things that I'm fighting against in this material is we've been conditioned to not be aware of the potential threat that all the other people in our environments pose to us. We've been conditioned away from that.
Well, explain that, because that's part of what I want to drill down on in this chapter.
Right. Well, we get reinforced frequently the notions that treat everybody equally. All people are the same. Don't judge people by how they look or how they act or anything like that. That's a constant reinforcement for us as we from kids to adulthood, right? That's just part of the messaging that gets imprinted on us over and over again. And it's a mistake of nuance, that message. I understand the intent behind it, but it's a mistake of nuance, right? So, but the result is we're conditioned to not look at everybody in our environment. And like you said, how do I kill everybody in our environment or get away from them? We don't look at our environments and the people in them as potential threats to us. We just dismiss out of hand.
What's wrong with those people?
With what people?
The people who don't do that.
Well, like I said, it's a conditioning thing, right? We don't have direct exposure to the environment, the environmental pressures to produce that mindset that requires or demands that we step into that frame, and we aren't proxying that. We're actually proxying the opposite of it in our development. right?
Mhm.
We're undermining that awareness. And so we kind of have to rebuild it. And that's what I'm doing in the book here. So that's the human threat. But the other step from that, right? That's one element of detachment from awareness of the threats that we've been conditioned to operate in or exist in. The other one is we don't even recognize the threats that our environment itself poses to us. Right? I mean, we're
Okay,
surrounded
so
by dangerous things all the time. We don't recognize that we're surrounded by dangerous things all the time. We don't. It's like it's not part of our awareness. It's
you
not
mean
part of
women
our.
drivers?
Women drivers, all kids. That's that's the thing, though. I mean,
Sorry.
you got to think about all the people operating machinery that we pass through, not just drivers, but
Yeah.
construction workers and people fixing the roads and all that kind of stuff. They're as focused on their task as you are. Right. So think about
Right.
that. We've got, thousands of pounds of metal and chemical and plastic hurtling by us on a regular basis. And yet we dismiss it out of hand that that's a potential threat to us. We're not paying any attention to the fact that condition exists in our environment. So it's not just the human threats, it's the actual physical environment that we're in as well that poses its own threats. You see those videos of people, they're so focused on their phone, they walk into a light post or a traffic signal post or something like that, right? I mean, we're surrounded by danger. And it's not, I don't say that to produce a sense of dread or anxiety. It's just, it's not part of our awareness, so we can't account for it.
That's it. You're giving this goes back to your central thesis, which is if you're not agentful, right? You're not full of it, you don't have agency, then you're externalizing that responsibility for agency on others. And at that point, you become dependent upon others. And when you become dependent upon others, you can become the victim of others.
Yeah, yeah.
So I mean, what I hear in my head, like I said all the time, and is the opposite side that would say, well, I'm trying to tie this back to the person walking across the street with their phone, right? Is it, well, I don't want to live in a world as if I'm paranoid. Well, you're going to touch upon that in the next bit, I know, which is
Right.
because it's not just being threats, it's also opportunities.
Right.
But
Yes.
so what has the world really changed so much because we have so much dopamine coming at us fast that people first became city dwellers have this the city people versus country people. If you live in the country, you have to walk things, you become aware of things like when I was a kid, certain animals that get out of the farm are actually dangerous, especially male bulls, right? I mean, all right. You're aware that there are coyotes and cougars and stuff like that around because it's a part of life. You're also aware that if something that people can just drive up to you on the side of the road and they're dangerous because there's no one around to see or hear it. So you become just aware of the situation. Am I correct in what happens is city dwellers become so constrained in their world? I'm just talking about city dwellers. I'm going to use that as the stepping stone.
Yes.
Then you get down to phone dwellers, where we're almost entirely inside of our heads, oblivious to everybody else. Is that the trend that's happened?
Yeah,
Just
it's the trend that's happening, and that's why I point to things like the agricultural revolution and the industrial revolution as key points in these key tipping points in our dependence and our expansion of dependence, right?
Mhm.
But then what happens is we have a feedback system in place as well. So, right? So the city dwellers start to lose these competencies as they sit in those dopamine states, as they sit in that separation from nature's pressures, right? What you were describing about living in the country, you're just directly exposed to nature's pressures, right? In the cities, you're much less so, right? So, but then they start driving the feedback systems. They start driving the conditioning systems. They start driving the institutions, how the institutions present the proxies for nature's feedback, right? How the schools present the proxies for nature's feedback. That's when we start getting the treat everybody equal, treat everybody the same. That may benefit you in a city. It may give the appearance of a lower cost of interaction. It's not accurate. It's not true, but it may give
So
that
it's also you
appearance.
probably in a city you can't do anything about it because the diversity is so high.
Right.
I mean, there's no. What are you going to do?
Right.
Okay.
So, but again, I think that misses a nuance. I think that's an inaccurate frame, but it misses a nuance, right? And that's another thing I'm trying to add with the book is that nuance. But then that feedback system, it starts to extend back into those rural areas because the schools are all teaching the same things. The entertainment's all teaching the same thing. The social structures are all teaching the same thing. So while there's in the countries, in the rural areas, you may still have some of that direct exposure pressure, but it's also being compromised and undermined by this feedback loop from the cities that are driving the institutional messaging, the
Yes.
narrative. Right.
So I'm sorry, I keep interrupting you, but I mean, I just find what you're talking about fascinating.
Right.
So, because to me, it's just natural, and the fact that it isn't natural, it is kind of, it's just weird to me. But I mean, why should it be weird? I mean, it's where the world direction has been going, right? I mean, we're down into your phone, so you walk in front of a bus. I mean, who would do that? I mean, so I mean, there's a thing about it. I gotta tell you, there's a fucking thing about it in Russia. It's sort of like there's an attitude of some certain minorities that they'll walk in front of your car intentionally to make you stop, and then walk slower to make you wait longer. Right. Well, in Russia, there's this problem of they don't really have, like, they have wide roads, and then they put these stripes on the road for the crossing, right? But then you get the people who just think I'm in the right, and they walk across it, and the people coming from this way don't see them, and they just, so you see people take the Russian short flight, which is being hit by a car, every single day over there, because people are so egoistically stubborn. So is that they're not situationally aware? Is there a difference between male and female situational awareness?
Not in the way I approach it, not functionally in the way I teach or the way I develop it or the way I practice it with people. What stands out as a baseline in an environment is probably going to be colored by things like that. Male or
I
female.
notice that women are really captured by the interpersonal relationship more than men are captured by the inner. And so that's, I don't find that we're generally more or less, we're generally at least equally situationally aware.
Right.
But I find that when women are distracted by an interpersonal interaction, they tend to so exclusively focus on it. And I'm just wondering if that's something, it's probably something you don't cover.
No, it's not something I cover specifically, because at the basic level, the threat,
The principle's the same.
right? The threat, if something can kill you, it can kill you. Right. So that I'm trying to cover the base level stuff with all this material, and that's universal because our basic human needs are universal. Right. So, but when it comes down, when it comes down to what represents a threatened environment, you're going to start to see differences between individuals, two guys that have different capacities.
Yes,
Things
absolutely.
that represent a threat, they're going to be different for them. So it
I'm
starts
little. I gotta worry about everybody.
right. So, but it starts to express differently for everybody as individuals, and of course, it expresses differently for groups of people as well that have shared characteristics and stuff like that. But the underlying thing, because the underlying element of all of this stuff is those basic needs, and it's true about across all animals, right? We all have the same basic needs, food, water, maintaining exposure, security, safety, reproduction, things like that. I mean, we have the same core needs as living creatures.
But again, going back to people who are increasingly oblivious,
right,
and they're losing this, and they're becoming victims of their environments because they're losing this. They seem to be pretty addicted to that distraction.
Yes.
So what do you do about people who are really addicted to that distraction? Are we all just going to be victims of the people who want to be victims?
To some degree, yeah. I mean, until we have effective proxies in place to account for this. One of the reasons I use the gym example so frequently is because we can see that dynamic in play between, you look at the West and you see obesity on the rise, and yet we also see solutions for obesity increasing. We see, more and more gyms opening up. We see more and more diet programs available to people, more and more services available to people.
I'm trying to get fat enough so that I can play Cartman on a live South Park.
Right, exactly. But that'd be funny, by the way, seeing you as Cartman. But I
threw him off.
I'm starting to picture you as Cartman, demanding people respect your authority and stuff. It's hilarious. It's a good thing. But just like we recognize that in order for our bodies to be optimally expressed, we have to apply those pressures that we get from the gym and dieting, so that we have to create a proxy for nature in the form of a gym and the trainer and the diets and stuff like that. We're going to end up having to do the same thing for all of these other systems that aren't currently expressing optimally, and nobody's done that yet. We don't have those proxies in place. We keep destroying those proxies actually. And so what I'm trying to do is get started, with reintroduction of those proxies. That's what all of the stuff I'm teaching is. It's just proxies for nature's pressures. Right. All of the core human competence stuff that I teach, that's all it is. Right. And just like you may never need to do, a 300-400 pound deadlift in real life. You may need to never run a 4 or 5 minute mile in real life and in some real situation where your life depends on it. Your body still needs you to be capable of things like that.
Right. That's I think the issue.
Yeah.
Is your body evolved to be in that degree of fitness, and it needs you to be there.
Right. And so did our cognitive development works the same way. We need pressures on our cognition in order for it to optimally express. Same thing with our emotions. In order for us to develop emotional regulation, we need some external emotional pressure on us. We're not doing a good job of that right now. Same thing with our perceptual awareness. Our limbic fitness is what I call it, right? We don't have pressures being applied. We're actually separating ourselves further and further from those pressures, and our dysfunctions are emerging because of that. Just like our physical dysfunctions emerge when we don't have the physical pressures being put on us, right? So that's really my goal here, is to discover and reintroduce proxies for nature's pressure to optimize the traits, the conditions, the mental, the emotional, and the perceptual fitness, right? Is what I'm working on. I'm working on training for those things. So
okay, so you've got this chapter broken into 2 basic sections. What are they?
Yeah. So the disrupted environment, and I'm talking about in here, I'm talking about atmospherics, which is the general concept, the overall concept. It's a inside baseball term, right? It's a technical term we use in the field of situational awareness. It's called atmospherics, and it's a study of shifts in the atmosphere, the environment around you. What is the feel? What is the context? What is the state of the environment around you? The overall tone or feel that you find yourself in. It's important because an environment has a baseline, and the atmospherics under normal conditions will align with that baseline. The atmosphere will match the baseline of that environment, right? We want to be aware of that so that we recognize when there's a shift away from an atmospheric shift away from that baseline, right? And that's what we actually call those kind of changes. I'm introducing some vocabulary in this section as well, right? I'm doing a lot of that throughout the book just for the purpose of consistency. But we call those changes atmospheric shifts. And that's what we're looking at. That's why we want the atmospherics on our radar, so that we can recognize those atmospheric shifts, right? And again, just to go back to, it's not just about threats. We want to recognize atmospheric shifts, even in ideal conditions, because what is the environment presenting as far as resources? What is the environment presenting as far as opportunities, right? What are the positive and negative things that are impacting the environment, and how do they impact me? Right. So we want to be aware of all of it all the time for that kind of reason, right? We want to be reading the room, as they say, the colloquial is being able to read the room. So going back to our baseline versus anomaly stuff, right? We atmospherics is like the first level of the baseline versus anomaly analysis. It's the broad view. It's the widest view you're going to get in your establishment of baseline versus anomaly, right? You're not looking at any individual person. You're not looking at any individual behavior. You're not looking at any individual cue. You're looking at the environment as a whole, and you're assessing that environment. And that's the process we call atmospherics, or the awareness that we call atmospherics.
So you got operation. I mean, I know what you're saying because I do it. So when I go into a place, what do you mean? How do you operationalize that? I mean, you've made the clear association between, you call atmosphere and environment, all right? Yes. So you've made this atmospheric association, that makes sense. So, but what's the process you do? I mean, if I walk into a room, say, what's the process I should use? You're saying you should, but I'm having like, well, what is this? What does that mean?
Right, and that's what we're going into next.
All right.
So when we're considering atmospherics, what we're incorporating all of the individual and group indicators that exist in the room. So we're looking at biometrics, kinesics, haptics, proxemics, right? How people are expressing themselves in the space, how people are moving around each other, how people are interacting with each other. But we're also adding to those signals, we're also incorporating the environment itself, such as what kind of iconography exists in the space, right? Is there graffiti all over the place? Is there signs? Are we in a store? So there's signs all over the place, advertisement, price signals. Are there, are we in a school environment? So we expect to see, the school flag or school motto somewhere, and the
Is
school
it decorated properly in French provincial?
right, exactly. What are the noise levels of the environment that we're in? That's part of the atmospherics. Is it a library? You can recognize the baseline atmospherics of a library. It's a quiet space, right? That's very different from the baseline atmospherics of a stadium in the middle of a game. It's a very loud place, right? So noise levels is part of the atmospherics. Activity levels in the space is part of atmospherics, right? And then the level of order or disorder is also a big part of the atmospherics in the space. So what we're doing is, instead of focusing on instead of focusing on any of the trees, we're examining the forest. We're identifying the state of the forest. Is it a quiet forest? Is it a loud forest? Is it an ordered forest, a disordered forest? Is there a fire raging in the forest or no fire raging in the forest, right? We don't care right now if any of the individual trees are on fire. We want to know if the forest is on fire, right? There's a difference there. So that's what I'm doing. It's the practice of it. It's about expanding your focus as broadly as possible in the space, expanding your awareness as broadly as possible in the space, and getting the overall feel for the space that you're in, the environment.
Does that mean I would go around and grab everybody and feel them?
Well, if you can get away with it, it would help.
I'm thinking that wouldn't work out well.
You would then become the anomaly in that environment. You would become the disruption. You would be contributing or creating the disrupted environment in that case, right? So in order to establish or incorporate all of those signals, what we're looking for are what we're calling atmospheric shifts, right? I mentioned earlier that an environment has a baseline. Ideally, the atmospherics align with that baseline. There is no shift away from that baseline. What we're looking for happening as far as identifying anomalies is positive, negative, or neutral shifts in the atmosphere. So a positive shift, a positive atmospheric shift is what we call an atmospheric pull, right? So it means there's something that has been introduced to the atmosphere that's pulling all of the people in the atmosphere towards it. One of the examples I use frequently is, you're a kid playing on the playground and suddenly you hear that jingle down the road. You can't quite see it yet, but you hear it. And what does that do is you see all the kids in the playground, they start to hear that jingle. They start to congregate towards the street or the parking lot where they expect that the source of the jingle to appear, right? The ice cream truck. The ice cream truck in that situation
You still
represents.
do that, by the way? Is that still going on?
Yeah, I still see them every once in a while, but I mean it's winter here, so they don't go around in the winter time. In the summertime, you still see them. But the ice cream truck in that scenario represents an atmospheric, a positive atmospheric shift. It's called a pull, an atmospheric pull towards something that is desired, something that people want to experience, right? At the same time, if you're in a you're walking down the street and suddenly you see a dozen people come around the corner running flat out towards you and then past you, your natural urge is to join them in running away from whatever they're running away from. Yep. Right? That would be a negative atmospheric shift. That would be an atmospheric pull or push. I mean, they're being pushed away from something negative that's been introduced to the environment. So the positive pulls us towards it, the negative pushes us away from it. Right? But both are atmospheric shifts. Now there's also neutral atmospheric shifts where something has been added to the environment that doesn't create a push or a pull, but it does change the tone of the environment. It shifts the atmospherics of the environment, right? It just doesn't introduce a push or a pull away or towards. Like you're in the coffee shop that we use as an example frequently in these conversations, and the live music starts playing. It doesn't necessarily pull you towards the stage. It doesn't push you away, depending on the music and your preferences, right? It doesn't push you away from the stage, but it does change the atmospherics of that environment, right? So that would be a neutral atmospheric shift, right? So again, that's just the introduction of vocabulary section of this chapter, right? Is the atmospherics, the atmospheric push or the atmospheric shifts, the pushes, the pulls, and so it's positive, negative, and neutral. it's push pull and no change at all.
When you teach this, do you have like PowerPoints and things like that?
Yep. Yeah, I use PowerPoints throughout all of this material, and I actually teach it in the opposite order when I'm doing the live classes that I do in the book. But because I'm marrying the situation awareness and behavior analysis training to the core human competence training, that the order fits better
The other way
in
around.
reverse on the situational awareness side of things.
Yes,
So
yes.
So when I'm doing the live training, and I have PowerPoints and examples of stuff that I go through for all these in the live training, I go, I do biometrics, kinesics, then I do proxemics, and then I do atmospherics. It's kind of how it works. So I start at the individual, and I'm reading the individual, the unconscious expressions the individual exhibits, the cues the biometric cues that they give off. What is their actual physiology doing in response to their environment? Right. That's the biometrics. Then it's the kinesics. What are their behaviors telling us, right? Then it's the proxemics. How are they interacting with each other in the space, or how are they navigating the space? Right, that's their proxemics. And then we get into atmospherics, which is what we're talking about here with the situational awareness stuff. So yeah, I teach all of this stuff, and I have slides and stuff that goes into detail about all of it when I do the actual presentations.
I'm just helping you upsell that, dude. That's
yeah,
all.
no, it's good. It's good stuff. And again, this stuff, the mistake people fall into when they first get exposed to this stuff is they think about it exclusively about threats. That's one of my big pushes throughout all this stuff is, yeah, we want threats is a hugely important element to this. I don't want to downplay that either. Threats is a big part of why we learn this stuff and why this stuff stuck with us, and how it became part of being human is because threat assessment, threat awareness was the way to survive, to reproduce, and make more humans, right? We wouldn't be here without threat assessments. But this stuff is also very applicable to taking advantage of opportunities, to how well we cooperate with each other, how we leverage interactions with each other, things like that. I mean, we want to be able to read the room. We want to be able to read.
Yeah, I always saw it as threat. Of course, I didn't learn it this way, but I always thought it as risks and benefits, or threats and opportunities.
Yeah.
I don't, we didn't learn it as a negative. It was
Right,
like,
yeah. And unfortunately, when this stuff is so completely off your radar, when you are that person that's not been exposed to any of this, when you are that person with your head in the phone, it can land really hard as a exclusively about threats type of training.
well, what I would anticipate a thing is, we like being selfish, and if I can do that, I can be as selfish as possible.
Right.
And not only that, when my attention is here, I'm preventing you from interacting with me.
Right.
Which is being more selfish.
Right.
So I'm like, well, yeah, you're being selfish, but as you continue being selfish, you're becoming more dependent, and then more vulnerable, and more the victim. So I mean, it's not that you shouldn't enjoy your little phone thing, but I mean, maybe when you're walking around in public, you should be listening to music and watching what the hell's going on around you, rather than obsessed about what Mary's posted on fucking Pinterest.
Right, exactly. And some of this stuff, we genuinely evolved to pick up on this stuff, right? I mean, our limbic system is taking in all of these signals all the time, and our bodies are responding to those signals, whether we want them to or not, whether we want to be aware of them or not. We're still taking them all in, and our body is responding to these signals. So that sense of anxiety you're feeling all the time, it doesn't go away if you don't correct for it, if you don't start to develop situational awareness. So you can have the puppies and unicorns and balloons with anxiety by not developing this stuff, or you can have the puppies and unicorns and balloons without anxiety by developing this stuff.
Right.
By developing situational awareness and behavioral analysis.
I remember how hard it was for me, because I remember driving my Jaguar, and I'm, because I got the first phones, right? So I had them early, and I'm like, I'm driving really dangerously right now. I shouldn't be doing this. And the amount of willpower it takes to not pick up. It's like picking up and looking is one thing, but picking up and scrolling and reading, or picking up and scrolling and responding, those are like really bad things, and the amount of willpower it took for me to say, it's okay to is that a crisis? No.
Right.
Is that a crisis? No. Is that it just took a lot of effort.
Yeah.
To do that.
It's funny because I've always been very good about not doing anything with my phone while I'm driving or anything like that. And there's been times when it drove my wife nuts. She's like, how can you do that? How can you just ignore it? I'm like, not a single person's life is on the line by being able to reach me or not.
Right. Yes.
I'm not a surgeon where they're waiting
Yes.
on me in the room and I have to give them direction to keep somebody alive until I can get there. I'm not a midwife who's, trying to get to a birth on time and I have to provide direction while I get there. Not a single life is in danger of me answering or not answering the phone. And I change that by answering the phone.
Well, that depends on the sphere of your responsibility. If you're a fan, like, I run $100 million company, right? So I mean,
Right.
there's like fucking shit going on all over the place. And the real problem there is the same. It's a similar thing, but you're actually worried about stuff going sideways.
Right.
It's not because someone's going to die. It's that the cost of pulling over and answering this right now is cheaper than the cost of these freaking morons running away with this really good idea
Right.
and creating a fucking catastrophe, or me not resolving a dispute and people getting angry with one another. So the problem, you have to take care of those, but you don't have to take care of those by doing it while you can pull over. You
Right.
can go,
Exactly. You pull over. Exactly. Yeah.
because I don't like split attention.
But anyways, the collective mood section of the book, that what I'm really getting at there is just reminding people that these are instincts, right? Your gut, your
It's your instinct. Is the right answer.
yeah,
Your intuition.
intuition. That's the word I was reaching for. It's there for a reason, and it developed for a reason. It's not just this. It's not like some weird appendage that we have for that doesn't serve a purpose. I mean, the reason you're here is because your ancestors paid attention to the signals in their environment well enough to survive that environment, so they could make you, so they could get you to be here, right? So the humans that picked up on signals in their environment survived, where the humans that didn't. Right? So that these things evolve for a purpose, to keep you alive. They're running all the time. They're picking up on stuff that even your brain's not aware of. Right? It's just the signals are coming in constantly. Right? And it's all of that's having an impact on you. So are you a victim to those signals, or are you the actor of those signals? Are you reacting or responding? Right? It's the distinction there. And that's where the survival needs section comes in, is where I start really getting into that. Right? It's your ancestors are your ancestors because they're the ones that could read their environment and leverage what that environment was telling them, good, bad, ugly, whatever. They were the ones that could tap in to the signals the environment was giving off, right? Your dependents will say the same thing of you if you can read your environments. They won't if you don't.
Yes. Okay.
Right. So that's the survival needs of this, right? We have intuition, we have a gut, we have the ability to read the room because it's essential to our survival, even now.
You can't think of it's like a great opportunity to insert some bit of nonsense in there, and I'm just going to let it go because everyone I think of is so bad I can't say it.
Right.
So let's just move on.
Right. And that's when I go back into, just revisiting in the next section about how atmospherics relate to baselines, right? And because we're constantly getting those inputs, we're constantly getting those signals, those cues from our environments, we want to start connecting our conscious processes to our intuition to improve the fidelity of our intuition.
Yeah, I would need to, let's keep it. I know what you mean. I think that saying that is a little abstract. What would you give me an example
of? Well, like we've been talking about, you when you're walking on the street with your face in your phone, all of those inputs are still coming in. Your peripheral vision is still working. Your hearing is still working. Your tactile senses are still working. You can feel temperature changes, things like that. So you're still receiving all of that information, but you're dismissing it by putting your focus onto the device or whatever it is that has your attention captured. So you're not able to effectively process any of those signals. You're receiving them, you're not processing them. You're not adding them to your ability to effectively navigate that environment, right? What we want to do is we want to shift our awareness to those signals coming in, at least partially shift our awareness to those signals coming in, so that we can add those signals, that feedback from our environment, to our ability to effectively navigate that environment.
So you're saying we can either try to focus a little less, or we can try to balance our focus with our situational awareness.
Yes.
And then basically that means don't become so obsessed with whatever you're doing that you lose your situational awareness.
Yeah, depending on how dynamic your atmosphere is, your environment is, that kind of dictates how frequently you want to check in with it. If it's changing rapidly, then you want to be checking in with it, you redefining your baseline of it on a regular basis. If it's pretty static, then you can afford to not reassess your baseline or redo your baseline as frequently, right? You can read your book at the coffee shop if there's not a lot going on at the coffee shop, right? I'm not saying that we have to be dialed in 100% to our environment all the time. We want to be dialed into the atmospherics of our environment 100% of the time so that we can determine whether or not we need to focus in on more of the details of the environment or not. Right. That's the reason we start with atmospherics.
I'm trying to figure out how would I recommend people, what was the behavioral shift I'd
The
recommend?
atmospheric shift.
Yeah, well, how would I do that so that I maintained, if I was trying to tell somebody, because it's not a problem for me.
Right.
So if I was to tell somebody, how do you maintain your situational awareness at all times? And the answer is don't get so fucking focused on whatever it is.
Right.
You don't. The problem is when it's just so exciting, especially if it's social.
Right.
To engage in other, because remember, when you're engaging with a person, that's the most consumption your brain can produce. So in other words, you're going to focus more of that than anything else.
Right.
Just the problem, right? So if you're doing social stuff when you're in a situational environment, that's probably the primary problem. If you're looking up, you're just browsing a few things and you're keep maintaining awareness, that's probably okay. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and even more than that is going back to the chapter on baseline versus anomaly. Don't dismiss the changes that your senses are picking up.
Right.
That's the big trap, right? You can be focused on something else as long as when you feel a shift in the atmospherics, you allow that shift to happen. You respond to that shift. You don't dismiss that shift. You don't justify it or explain it away or come up with a reason for it. You don't hear the loud bang and go, "Oh, that was just a car backfiring." You accept that a shift has happened in the atmosphere and you reassess your baseline based on that shift. You don't dismiss it.
I teach something different in creativity, which is the same problem. It's the same question, which is when I'm trying to get a person, is that many of us get obsessed with loud thoughts or our first thought.
Right.
And we don't listen to the edges. And that's where all the novelties occur.
Yes.
It's your edges, right?
Yes.
You're not, you're the reason you come up with a great idea is not because it struck you like thunder out of nowhere. It's because it's at the edge of your thought.
Right.
There's an association. It's off on the fringe. And I noticed in this, I'm just an odd example, but I noticed in myself when I was having difficulty studying, right? Something I didn't like is I was trying to memorize it too hard rather than just read it 3 times casually.
Right.
Right. I mean, so because those associations are what make it stick, right?
Right. Yeah.
Those associate. So I'm just trying to say, how would I try to tell somebody? Well, you're just trying to listen, not to the things that are loud, but to the cues,
right?
What you call anomalies. What's different here?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and thinking about it like that, thinking about it, you're listening to the edges is a good way of doing it because that's you can have your focus on something else as long as you're willing to hear the edges, as long as you're willing to hear the peripheral of all of your senses. Right? I mean, that's what they're doing for you is they're tied into everything, even while you're not. You just can't deny them those signals. You can't shut their signals off to maintain situational awareness. Right.
I'm sure in a very safe place.
Right. Yeah. A place you have a lot of control over.
I'm sorry, just the act of God thing. So I don't know if you remember this, but back in Bellevue, there was a skyscraper going up next to my office, and there was only one guy that died when this crane collapsed. He's sitting in his fucking living room at a computer and he gets killed by a fucking crane. And I always wondered, it wasn't quiet when it broke, right?
Right.
And, would you have moved and done something if you hadn't had headphones on? Right.
Yeah. So even in situations like that, right, we could recognize that there's times when even the safest environment we can create for ourselves is still not safe. Right. And we can get so focused, so removed from situational awareness where we're still at risk.
Yep.
So yeah, it's a very natural thing to have happen. One of the phrases or sayings I use on a regular basis when I'm talking to people about this stuff is everybody, they want to be able to trust their gut, right? And I agree, you want to be able to trust your gut. My recommendation is that you train your gut so that you can trust your gut, right?
Listen,
Right now, people want to be able to
get
trust
used to listening to the edges.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Get used to listening to the edges, develop the awareness so that your gut is a believable source, is a trustworthy source of information for you. Then yeah, trust your gut. Right. Another way I describe it is, picking up on the mood of a room or a place. Right. This is, I bring this one up because this is where I think it helps people shift out of the threat assessment. Right. Picking up on the mood. It could be, picking up on, is somebody in a bad mood in the space, and it's not the appropriate time to crack a joke, or it might be the appropriate time to crack a joke, right? I mean, that's how we pick up on signals like that, is reading the room.
Demand for that's what happens is our demand for interaction, attention, stimulation overrides.
Right.
And so you're not being sufficiently aware.
Yeah. So the stuff that I'm talking about in a lot of this book, it just contributes to being a more effective communicator. Right, because you're developing the ability, you're enhancing your ability to read the people, to read the spaces you're in, and to adjust and adapt what you're communicating and how you're communicating in response to being able to read the room.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And we're all exposed to atmospherics every day. One of the other examples I use with people is, there's a bunch of guys or girls or whatever in the break room at their job, and they're cracking jokes and they're hamming it up and things like that. Then the boss walks in the room. Is that a threat or a risk that entered the room? Not usually, but it definitely changes the atmospherics of the room. The behavior of everybody in that space will often change based on that new element entering the space.
I'm hyper gregarious, so I have an allergic reaction to those things.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I immediately try to engage whoever came in to break, because the stress, it bothers me.
Right.
That stress bothers me. So I'm usually the first one. Hey, how are you? We're just doing no work here at all. We just,
Right.
But you're trying to remove the stress anyway.
Right. Yeah. So that's the human interaction side of the atmospherics that I go into in the disrupted environment chapter. Now I shift and start to talk about how the disrupted environment manifests for nature, right? And this is where we go into looking at our environment as a resource, right? So I'm trying to get people away from limiting their thinking to just being about humans, but to expand that to all biology has needs. All biology responds to needs in very similar ways, right? And we can
Like
use
crocodiles
that.
eat you.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Crocodiles, they got to have food and water.
Just
and
happened
air.
the other day again, and I'm
Right.
like, how can you live in Florida and not be worried about alligators? I mean, I don't get it.
So as we develop competence in all of these skills, we're actually enhancing our ability to not just navigate human interaction, but to navigate all interaction with all of our environment, every aspect of our environment, right? And nature in particular, right? So some of the things I go into in this section is, what does atmospheric shifts look like in nature? What are we looking for? What represents a disrupted environment in nature? From a fieldcraft point of view, from a survival point of view, a core human competence point of view, what are we looking for? We're trying to find resources, right? We're trying to find game. We're trying to find water. We're trying to find things like that, right? So if I can follow, all animals need water, right? So if I can find a game trail, then I can follow all the other animals that need water to their water source. If I need food, I can follow all the other animals that need food to their food source, or I can turn them into a food source, right? So I want to be looking at my environment from that perspective as well. How do I turn the atmospherics of the environment into a resource for me, into a tool to enhance my ability to survive and navigate the environment? So I go into some, I do an introduction on basically tracking in this section of the nature side of the disrupted environment, right? What kind of signs are you looking for when you're following trails, right? And none of this stuff is hard. This section, none of it's hard here, but it's just not on most people's radar. Just learning how to look at an environment and see disruptions in that environment. So are
These things that don't make sense.
right? Yeah,
Why is that there?
right.
Exactly. You might want to just think about it. Why is that there? That seems odd, right?
Right. Why is that spot wet when everything around it is dry?
Mm-hmm.
Why is that rock tipped over when none of the other rocks are tipped over? Why is that blade of grass bent when none of the other blades of grass are bent?
Why is that blood stained there?
Right. Why is that candy wrapper there? Right. And
somebody just got killed by, I don't know, somebody got killed by a bear because they didn't.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
They didn't turn around the minute they saw the blood stain.
Right. Yeah.
This wasn't that long ago.
Why is everything around that spot weathered and that spot isn't weathered?
Yes.
Right. Because it's newly exposed, things like that. Why does this spot smell funny and the other side, everywhere else doesn't smell funny? So all of these things that go into, the details of paying attention to what's going on in our environment, so that if we had to follow a trail, we could. The flip side of it is, once this stuff's on your awareness and you're trying to avoid leaving trail, right, you can start paying attention to how you're impacting the environment as you move through it. Well, how are you disrupting or not disrupting the environment as you move through it?
Why is the bear dragging my garbage the same direction every time?
Right. Yeah.
That was scary.
Yeah, I bet. Well, and that's what we forget, because we hold ourselves so separate and above nature, but we all have these common needs, which means we all have very common expressions. We all try to find food, try to acquire food. We all try to acquire water, right? We're constantly trying to acquire resources. We're trying to keep ourselves safe from our environments, things like that. All creatures are doing that. All creatures have mechanisms for doing that. So we can, because of that commonality, we can leverage the behaviors that emerge out of that commonality by being aware of them. That's kind of what I'm getting at in a lot of this section here. So
are you done or not? Because I have a summary sort of thing.
Yeah. The last part, the last section of the book here is about evading predators, right? All of our predators have needs just like we do, including the human predators, and that's what makes their behavior predictable.
Didn't they just do cannibal something on Last of Us episode,
something like that? Yeah, I don't know. So, but again, it's that consistency of needs, that underlying need, that basic level needs that are consistent across all biological organisms, that allows us to make predictions about and basically do behavioral analysis on and situational awareness on all of the things, all of the organisms that exist in our environments, all of the people, all of the animals, all of the plants, everything. They're all responding to their needs. And because of that, we can anticipate what behavior should or shouldn't be there, and what's going to happen because of those behaviors, because of that commonality of needs.
Okay, so I want to do this series because I want to promote you, because part of not only my job, but we're friends. But I have learned quite a bit out of this, and one of the weird things is I know I'm hyper confident, but I didn't, until you've sort of covered this, I didn't realize all the stuff that I learned as a kid that is I just took for granted.
Yes.
Right. You take all this stuff for granted and you say, well, yeah, but I lived in, the countryside, right? I lived in a rural area. And so you do all those things because, frankly, it's the only form of entertainment when there's only 3 channels of television and 2 of them are fuzzy, right? So you do all those things. And I'm just like, well, is that where this, and I say, so if that's where my confidence comes from, does that mean Luke is right? And I'm like, well, yeah, it means Luke is right. I mean, it's just disturbing that it isn't. In other words, I'm finally coming to terms with what you saw, with what we've lost. I'm finally getting there, and it's actually terrifying me. Yes. Because I just take, we all do this, right? We take what I feel I must be normal. Well, in my case, I don't think I'm normal, but in many ways, you think you're normal, right? Right. So everybody must know these same basics as I do.
Mhm.
Everybody must have the same situational awareness I do. Everybody must know how to do things like making a rope and making shelter and
Right.
knowing how to walk trails and go hunting if with a bow or with a rifle or even a pistol, right? And how to, you just learned all those things because when I was a kid, you just learned those things, right? Right. You know how to walk 2.5 miles to school and back if you have to, because nobody's going to take you otherwise. So you
Right.
might as well get going. You know all these things and you become used to adversity.
Yes.
And what you're really, if I think about that is why do these young kids seem so dumb to me? Right? I remember my grandparents thinking, "Well, you're overconfident." Well, I'm not overconfident. We're just wealthier than you were, right? I mean, I remember saying that.
Right.
That caused some wheels to spin, right? So my risks are lower. But if you look at some of these people I meet today, and they don't seem to grasp the world.
Right. Yeah.
And so what you're saying is they've actually become sufficiently disconnected from it that they're not just dependent, they're actually victims.
Yes. Yes. That exactly.
I know I'm thick, but I would just want to communicate to you and the audience.
Yeah.
I'm eventually getting it here.
Yeah. No, that's what kind of started landing on my radar. Was it's not, that the very first chapter in the book, the very first sentence of the book, the intro, the title of the chapter is "How We Failed You." They're
Yes.
they're victims of a foundation that we've allowed to erode,
Right, right.
and the only way to the only way to fix that is to rebuild that foundation.
Now I'm sad.
Well, hopefully the other side of this coin that's dropping is you recognize that I have solutions as well, not just I've identified the
No,
problem.
I know that. But still, I read the book, but until we're talked about it, and maybe it's one thing to read something and say, I understand,
Yeah.
because I think of it more like, what is the author trying to get across here?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And how should, what are the objections and what are the confidences that you're going to get out of this? Right. I mean, I get that, but I didn't sit here and internalize it and think about, well, okay, I did an intellectual read of your book. Now now go through it. I'm having a personal experience of what you're trying to go through,
Yeah.
and it's helping me understand it. And it's helping you understand why you saw the severity of this issue.
Yeah. Well, and, I was fortunate just because of the way I've done life. I'm in a unique position where I have, I'm a Gen Xer, right? But I've got kids that are really spaced out. So I mean, my daughter's a millennial. My son is a Gen Z. I've got
Yeah.
kids now that are Generation Alpha, right? And so I've been able to not just from a distance see this shift happening and this dynamic and this phenomenon of the separation, this loss occur. I've been able to engage with it through just interacting with my kids, interacting with their peers, interacting with the culture that they are engaged in and immersed in, right? The school and the activities and all that kind of stuff, all of these influences. So for me, it's not just an intellectual observation. It's an experienced process because I'm engaged in my kids' activities, because I'm engaged
Yes.
with my children's peers and have been throughout their life. So I've been a parent of now three different separate generations,
Yes,
and I've
yes.
added to that my own experiences, and I can see this just degradation with each iteration of people, that we're losing more and more of this stuff, and then I'm watching these dysfunctions that are increasing at the same rate
Yeah.
of loss of these competencies. And so it's like, okay, maybe there's something there connecting those two. And that's what got me digging on this stuff. And a lot of people don't have kids spread out like that. So, for them, it's
Well,
not
other people also don't have your basic skill set, which is,
right.
I mean, you are, I mean, you're giving people what sounds like personal advice here, but situational awareness is your business. So,
Yes.
so, I was thinking interesting of, I listened to there's a new book coming out by a woman in the UK, and I don't know, she's an anti-progressive feminist, I guess you call her. And she's saying, well, she started out with, the pill, we talk about transhumanism, but the pill is the first thing we've invented that is transhuman, right? That's given us control of something rather than cured something that went wrong.
That's funny.
And she builds back to the questions about women voting and women in the workforce as the Industrial Revolution came in. What you notice really clearly about those examples is the family was still the primary focus of policy. You're trying to make everybody, regardless of the background, create a healthy, productive, right, nuclear family, right? So intergenerational family that produce people for a high trust society. So what I see is feminism isn't, it's the switch to individualism in the 60s, all right, which was forced on us really, and away from family as the objective of policy and institutions, not the individual, the family. The individual has to have freedom in order to make a family, right? But it's not that whole thing. And so I just look at this and I'm like, God damn, we did pretty well through about 1960.
Yep.
And it just goes absolutely haywire after that.
Yeah, I look at the pill as being a hard separation from nature's pressure, and then we didn't introduce any kind of proxy to accommodate for that hard separation. We stopped doing full accounting. Prior to that, we still had, the family was functioning as a proxy for nature's pressure on the reproductive side, right? But then the pill hit, and that was a hard separation from.
I mean, isn't that, well, that's my whole argument is that the post-war period is just take the collapse of empires, which is the first two world wars, right? The end of empire and the conversion of federations. To some degree, our problems with Russia, China, Iran, etc., are the continuation of this world wars, which are the collapse of empires,
right,
and the rest and the conversion of federations. But then, what you see happening is this pursuit of individualism that has led to this this idea that the individual is more important than the family. In other words, the family is the first productive institution. And I just go back and I say, well, we all we did during that, all those fantasies are claiming, which is I say all the time, it's denial of the laws of nature, scarcity, denial of behavioral laws, self-interest, right, reciprocity, amorality, right, reciprocity, etc., and the denial of evolutionary pressures, which is the various variations between the groups and the genetic load accumulating in the lower classes, and lastly, the one that the postmoderns attack, which is truth itself. Right. So I mean, all these things are denials to separate us from nature. Yeah. Now, hadn't connected. I know you like to rub it in because you're smarter than I am about a lot of this stuff, but it's okay. And I want to make sure the audience knows that I accept that you're smarter than I am about this stuff. So what you're saying is no, this is the foundation of the separation from nature. We got to go start back here. Yeah. I'm always worried about, well, we've separated from nature's pressures, right? And so I'm worried about the political side. But what you're saying is that we have to actually make people human again.
Yes. Yeah. Unfortunately, yes. That's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah. We've stopped being human.
And you can't be.
No.
Well, you can, but it's like stopping breathing.
Yes.
It just takes you longer to die.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, anything else you want to add for this?
No, that covers it. I guess the only thing, just to riff off of what you just described and articulated, we've taken the individual to the point now where they take for granted that the environment exists, right? Right now, we're such individuals that the entire environment exists to serve us as the individual.
Yes.
And so I don't have a reason to pay attention to it. It's there to serve me.
Right.
It's there to respond to my whims. I don't need to be aware of it at all, and that's the problem I'm correcting here.
There's no perpetual motion machine.
Right.
We have to keep going.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's exactly what I'm aiming at here.
So we can have your book again. Show your book again.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Primal Primer, right? And I have forgot to paste the links at the bottom of the past two videos, and I'll go back through and do that. All right. Well, thank you. I really enjoyed this. I enjoy these talks.
Yeah, absolutely.
I hope the audience, I get a lot out of them. I hope the audience does too. Well,
yeah, me too. I appreciate you taking the time to go through it. So,
all right. Thank you very much. Yep. Take care.